what did I eat this morning? Banana. The banana I had this morning. That banana, if I'm truly present with it, and I offer myself an interconnected practice with it, I can walk it all the way back to its seed. I can walk it all the way back to remembering, grew through how many cycles of winter, spring, summer, fall? How many elements came to support it? The soil of the earth, the waters of the earth, the sun of the earth. All of that took, right? All of that energy came forward, and how many hands were involved in making sure I could eat it. When I'm more present to that as I eat, it deepens that care, love, and reciprocity to what I'm eating, how I'm eating, and how I'm nourished. I'm not, one piece of food can actually be nourishment of connection to all life. Like how much community of life is here giving you life with one little banana. Right? Like, and that to me is so healing. And especially when we're looking at healing where the wounds of our trauma might live, often trauma creates a lot of separation.
Today, I'm super excited to introduce you to my special guest, Dr. Rochelle Calvert. She is a licensed clinical psychologist, certified mindfulness teacher, somatic experiencing practitioner, and author and retreat leader that has a devoted love to share the power and healing potential of mindfulness, somatic awareness, and most of all, nature. She has studied and taught mindfulness for the past 20 years and knows personally the transformation potential. To share the love of these healing practices, she has published a book called Healing with Nature: Mindfulness and Somatic Practices to Heal from Trauma. Dr. Calvert leads courses and retreats in mindfulness, somatic experiencing, and awake in the wild, nature-based mindfulness. She also facilitates professional trainings in mindfulness for clinicians and travels the country teaching retreats and seminars. She is the director of the Ecotherapy program at Southwestern College and New Earth Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico. She is a certified mindfulness teacher with the Mindfulness Teaching Institute, the International Mindfulness Teachers Association, and Awake in the Wild organization. Rochelle is the founder and clinical director of New Mindful Life, which offers mindfulness, nature-based, and somatic experiencing therapies. She teaches individual meditations with nature that assist in healing from trauma. She supports her clients and takes them into nature with the aid of Bertha Grace, a Sprinter van that serves as a mobile therapy office. Rochelle now lives in New Mexico and has a private practice in both New Mexico and San Diego, California. She enjoys spending her free time in nature, hiking, practicing yoga, exploring indigenous heritage, and resting with trees. Without further ado, here is Rochelle. Rochelle, thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina. Good to be with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Yes, I have been looking forward to chatting with you. It seems like you've had an interesting journey. You do a lot of things, you wear a lot of hats. I know that you are a therapist, you run retreats in nature, you're an author, you're a mindfulness teacher, you are a somatic experiencing practitioner. And I'm wondering, what was the order of operations there? You know, this is my story in the head is you started as a therapist, then you were a meditation teacher, and then lastly, you got certified in somatic experiencing, and I don't know, but I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your journey and how you ended up where you are.
Well, I like to say that the doorway of finding these beautiful contemplative practices of mindfulness found me, and your story is partly right. It found me through being a therapist, and then inadvertently after being a therapist in pursuit of my doctoral degree, I landed in a random conference room in a hotel actually in Vegas, which is just kind of a funny story to tell. And somebody was talking about mindfulness. And I was like, what is this? How come I hadn't learned about this yet in my graduate studies? This was quite a many number of years ago now. So it was newer to the scene. It hadn't really bloomed onto the scene in terms of psychology, but it made its way into this conference room. And as soon as I heard a little bit about what it was, I was like, I want to know more. That was it. It was very clear. And so from that spark and that it finding me, I just followed who was sharing more of it and followed initially who was sharing more of it inside the psychology world. How were we studying it within psychology? And, this was, almost 20 years ago now. So at that time, we had studied a little bit about MBSR, but it really hadn't made its full presence onto the scene of psychology. So I kind of was picking up at the very onset of the wave of that understanding of how that body of work, mindfulness, could come in and be facilitative of healing and all the things that we struggled with. Being a part of UCSD's Center for Mindfulness that really took on how do we take this body of knowledge around mindfulness and apply it to specific arenas of psychology that we know, i.e. mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, mindfulness-based relapse prevention, mindfulness-based eating awareness practices. The school really took on what it would be like to start creating formats, creating ways to practice and explore blending these ways we understood the healing arts to help these conditions, but also how mindfulness was helpful. Spent some time there, did a lot in that world of supporting each of those hybrid programs to bring together, and had a deep passion at that time in my career for really supporting mindfulness-based eating and learning and studying with a lot of the early developers of the infusion of these practices. Moving from that, I actually realized as I was practicing and teaching a lot of mindfulness to my clients and in the community and with groups, it wasn't quite enough. And that's where the somatic training piece came in. I felt like there's a beautiful body of teachings where all of mindfulness is coming from, but it's being adapted from 1,000-year-old traditions and being brought forward to help us. But our psyches are dealing with so much trauma that maybe wasn't really present in that same way when these teachings originated. That understanding the body was an important piece to not inadvertently bypassing important pieces of maybe what originated the thing that we were suffering with. If we have depression, if we have substance addiction issues, if we have challenges with eating, usually tethered to an unhealed trauma. So needing to bring in that body of knowledge became steeped in that work. And in that work, I found, well, beautiful body of work, but it's teaching us to resume our inherent nature as a nature being. That's its design. It's teaching us to come back to our body and the organization and capacities of its regulation, but we weren't practicing it outside. So the evolution that has evolved from that place has been, how do we blend all of that mindfulness, depth of understanding of the body, and bring us back into our relational origin connection to the natural world to support having that with us while we're doing these healing practices.
I love that. And you're really speaking my language. I can see the progression, mindfulness as, like the traditional perspective of it being really helpful and important, but then perhaps lacking in some ways. And I'm actually a doctorate student myself, and I'm focusing on somatic psychology. And that my dissertation actually is about the use of body-based strategies during compulsions to binge eat, which can be uncomfortable sensations. And the literature that exists, for example, in mindfulness as a coping strategy, which is essentially urge surfing, I just felt like there's not enough there. Like mindfulness is really important, but not only is it like not the whole understanding, but our body can offer us tangible support. For example, touching ourselves, in a moment of difficulty or challenge can feel very tangible, as opposed to a mindfulness strategy. It's like, okay, let's be aware, let's think about it, let's know that this sensation is going to end. But there's some of us who are like, we need something a little bit more. So I can understand the progression to the body. And then I can see that just from a big picture, we're still depending on ourselves if we're just focusing on the body. And so then I can see why you would kind of zoom out and see how, can we lean on a support that is bigger than ourselves, which is nature. So I can see how you brought it all together.
Yeah, and so beautiful that you're in that inquiry of what does it mean to inhabit the body that much more deeply as a refuge or as a place we can rely on or connect with in some intentional way. And yes, this body is when we really become, the truer teachings and deeper teachings inside mindfulness remind us actually that our body is interconnected to all of life. Like there's no way to separate that. I take a breath of air in, I'm part of the earth. I give it back out, I'm helping the earth. Like that simple little cycle is always happening when we take notice of the breath. So that ability to check in with your body as part of something larger gives us another place to have the body held in a certain way that doesn't feel sometimes quite so difficult. This is why when I started realizing actually that teaching mindfulness indoors and therapeutically, even applying mindfulness and somatic practices indoors, it just felt like, especially because we were in the wells of trauma, it wasn't enough. Like the container wasn't enough. But as soon as we stepped outside and I started figuring out what are the ways we can just be outside, we don't even need to do anything with the outside, just step outside of a room and put one's nervous system in that direct field of connection, the practices we're talking about became that much easier for people, right? There was something bigger that people could feel, created a little sense of ease, often a little more safety. Then we could practice these things that sounds like you're exploring with a little less ripping to get it to happen versus, oh, I'm held in something. I can do this a little more. And it has evolved. My work has evolved to really support people how to find and develop these practices with the natural world.
I love that so much. There's been, I'm sure you're aware of the burgeoning body of research regarding how nature regulates the nervous system. It's fascinating. So I think that's wonderful that you're actually implementing this because people actually, therapists and practitioners actually taking, their work out into nature is not very common nowadays. And so I love that you are actually doing that.
Yeah, I'm a big champion for helping us all figure out how to get outside with our clients. I'm also now I lived in San Diego for 20 years, but now I reside in Taos, New Mexico, and I teach with a school here locally that has a ecotherapy program, and we are training therapists how to bring this work into and with the natural world. So that I find, I'll speak for myself and I think my students and those who practice this way, not only does the client benefit because they have more of a bigger container to draw from, feel more supported. We know all that beautiful research that's saying, hey, your cortisol levels drop. Hey, your heart rate slows. Hey, your facial muscles relax. There's all this, just spend some time out there. You don't even need to have therapy. It benefits you. Then you have therapy with or have a relational connection with somebody who's helping to guide you. Not only does the client benefit, but we benefit. Like I have found that my own nervous system's capacity to hold and support whatever people need is amplified and buoyed when I'm outside and supporting people in that way.
When you support people outside, is it, and maybe it's different things and you can explain it to me and the audience if this is the case, do you have like two chairs set up in the middle of trees? Are you like, is it a walk and talk? I know that you have a sprinter van named Bertha Grace, if that's correct. Like, can you tell me about the different manifestations how this happens?
Yes. Yeah. So, well, it came out of a crisis moment of like, I can't be in the walls anymore. How do I not be in the walls anymore? And broke down as, good breakdowns will do. They force you to look at what you need
Break
to look
through.
Right, breakthrough. Yeah, so it was in that moment that I recognized I need a different way to be outside. And my sweet partner at the time said, why don't you get a van? And I thought, he's out of his mind. What is he talking about? And that lasted 30 seconds. And I thought, that's the answer. I am getting a van. And I did it. And I closed my practice and got the van and created the van to be a therapy office itself. And so it served as a container. And it fortunately for me, happened that I did this right before, about a year and a half before we went into the pandemic. That ability to have already taken my clients outside and have a place and a way to be outside just blossomed during that time, actually. But what I found is actually the van was great and it had a bathroom and it was lovely and it could, make sure we could go anywhere and have a little base camp of sorts. But what ended up happening is no one ever really wanted to meet inside the van. We just would meet actually under a tree, or we would go on the walk and talk, or we would find ways to sit actually near a body of water, or, even walk in the water, just things that would be where we needed to go in the relational, again, that relational container of being in the natural world. So it's looked different for all of the folks that I've supported in terms of really what their own nervous systems, their own healing processes really needed. Did we need to get on the ground? Did we need to get our bare feet on the ground? Did we need to get closer as therapist and client, right? This is to your comment earlier about self-touch, right? Somatic work really invites more of that contactful support to be offered from whoever's offering the supportive facilitation of somatic experiencing, but so does the natural world. So I would often use with clients that reciprocity of touch with and from the earth, or touch with and from myself, and again, just so much more to draw from when we're outside in that way.
That is so beautiful. I want to ask you about your work with mindful eating. Can you tell me about ways, I don't know if you currently work with clients, and in that way, how do you facilitate that? Do you guide them in practices, or do you just refer them to certain books? Like, who is a typical client you work with now?
I'll start with that question and work my way back.
Sorry to ask
um,
you two at the
that's
same
okay.
time.
That's okay. I think I can hold it all. Remind me if I didn't answer something. But the client base that I support now are those who are ready to work on healing trauma. And so usually they've identified some place of stuck experience from their trauma that they really want to work on. Now, then that lends itself to all kinds of manifestations of what stuck trauma looks like for people, right? So some clients are coming to me with eating concerns, some addiction concerns, some anxiety, really the whole gamut. And so not super specific at this moment with regards to a particular focus of a diagnosis, but very specific with if one knows that trauma is an origin of what creates some of that constellation of symptom suffering that they're in, then we're working on the root to support the resolve of all of that. And in terms of mindful eating and what that can look like, I'll go way back actually to share that my own dissertation was on mindfulness and binge eating, and was on looking
No
at,
way.
yeah, and looking at that point, was like 20 years ago. So at that point, again, the research was so sparse, but all we were doing was looking at if someone inherently had more tendencies towards what mindfulness supports. So we weren't even looking at it as an intervention. We were looking at it as if I gave you a measure that says how mindful are you in general without even intervention, how would that be a predictor of how much binge eating one would or wouldn't have?
Mm-hmm.
And we found that there was an indicator that said yes, if we were, and we had some of those traits or some of those qualities of understanding within our own being, it would predict less of those instances. But from that, really got super interested in all the different ways mindfulness practices could support deepening that awareness to the suffering that was going on around mindful eating, and practices of satiation and hunger awareness and depth of what it means to connect, to be interconnected with food and embodied with food, rather than often we in disordered eating thinking and dysregulation, we've kind of left the building. We're in those fight, flight, and freeze reactivity patterns, and it's really hard to be in the present moment with that. And during that phase and offering of more of that work in my career, I came to love and still love Jan Chosenbay's teachings of mindful eating. She really, I think, tethers the traditional way of understanding the way the West is understanding mindfulness, but deepens it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And to that, at this point in my path of offering healing, it's in the mindful eating realm, is how deeply not just present to the experience of eating, right, which is I'm sensing, I'm tasting, I'm feeling the food experience in my body, watching that moment to moment, but adding the relational field of our connection to the food. And one of my favorite practices to support people with is, how do you know where your food is actually from? Like if you did the deep reflection and introspection of, what did I eat this morning? Banana. The banana I had this morning. That banana, if I'm truly present with it, and I offer myself an interconnected practice with it, I can walk it all the way back to its seed. I can walk it all the way back to remembering, it grew through how many cycles of winter, spring, summer, fall? How many elements came to support it? The soil of the earth, the waters of the earth, the sun of the earth. All of that all of that energy came forward. And how many hands were involved in making sure I could eat it? When I'm more present to that as I eat, it deepens that care, love, and reciprocity to what I'm eating, how I'm eating, and how I'm nourished. One piece of food can actually be nourishment of connection to all life. Like how much community of life is here giving you life with one little banana, right? Like, and that to me is so healing, and especially when we're looking at healing where the wounds of our trauma might live. Often trauma creates a lot of separation and aloneness and sense of not feeling good enough or connected enough or all of those ways. So that practice of not just present to the experience of eating as this one, but present to this one eating in relational connection to life and what that really means. It can be powerful. I sometimes support people to take on eating as an elements practice. You're eating the elements, right? And when you widen your lens to say, oh, that moment of a squished banana is water, is sunlight, is the earth, is the fire element in you. Like we're so, again, kind of consumed in the dysregulated mind that we forget that these are actually real experiences of your eating. We're just not pointing our attention to.
I can see that this practice of mindful eating it, but taking it to that other level of connecting to the elements and thinking about the life cycle of that food. Where did it come from? Who were the people involved in, all the steps involved in getting this food to me? As you said, widen the lens and move us beyond the addictive pattern of eating disorders and compulsive patterns that oftentimes, as you said, manifests as isolation and this overly individualistic orientation. And that helps move us to considering the transpersonal support of nature, and just the larger web that we are a part of, and how we are being supported in ways that we had not thought about, supported by the elements of the earth, the sunlight, the soil, supported by other people that we aren't thinking about, all the hands involved in harvesting and preparing the food, and the people driving the trucks, and people setting up the food in the grocery stores, and all these people involved in processes that we hadn't thought about. That really helps us to zoom out instead of being overly focused on our own suffering and our own individualist experience. But that helps us to widen our lens, say we're part of a whole constellation of nature and this world that is way bigger than us. And I can see that that actually changes the whole experience.
Yeah, and I think it helps to kind of cut through, at least maybe for a little bit, right? The overwhelming intensity of how we get lost in that small experience.
Right.
And not to say that it's small, it's there for a very good reason and usually trying to just protect us. But if we can turn our attention in this other way, I think it actually begins to dissolve some of that without having to really work at it, right? Like it's actually just an inner reflection of our connection to life.
Absolutely. And another thing that came to mind as you were speaking about, contemplating this other layer is gratitude. That kind of was another thing that kind of came up. I think there's a lot of things that come up in the practice that you're mentioning. But yeah, another thing that came up for me was gratitude. Like, wow, thank you to these elements that have facilitated me to be able to eat right now. Thank you to the people who are working to allow me to eat right now. So there's like this gratitude that can come up too. Again, without the forcing, but just this natural sort of thought about, wow, Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that gratitude state is extraordinarily wholesome, right? It actually is a balm for some of those places that we can get stuck, right? When we're in any of these healing ways that we're learning or experiencing or practicing, right? The ultimate reason that we would take any of that on is so that we cultivate a wholesome state. And once we get one, we water that like a giant seed that needs all the water that it can get, right? So if we start to feel that sense of gratitude, like, how could I use that even as my practice? Like gratitude for my bananas in the morning, or gratitude for the person who stacked the bananas so sweetly. Like that could become a way to carry you through your day for that particular day that might be a wholesome state of being, that if you nurtured it through your day as it starts to come forward, again, it's another way to cut through and dissolve those patterns.
I'd love to hear your perspective on informal versus formal mindfulness practices. That's been something I've been super interested in, especially trying to dive into the literature as it relates to recovery from binge eating, food addiction, compulsive eating patterns. And there really is not a lot about it. And I'm curious, I'm much more of an informal mindfulness type of person, maybe because of my history with trauma, or maybe I just haven't gotten to that level yet, or I don't know what, maybe in the future I'll change. But at the moment, I prefer informal practices. But I'm just curious, what's your recommendation, or what's your orientation towards these different ways of working with mindfulness?
Well, it's a really good question to be in the inquiry of. And I would say, much to it sounds like how you're already listening, everyone is going to have what feels best for them in terms of how to practice, whether it's formal or informal, whether it's studying more teachings or living it in some particular way in action, right? So that I think is primary. I'm just going to say that. I may have ideas, but I think we all have our own wisdom that is important to listen to, because to your point, one of the reasons that I sought studying somatic experiencing and getting more trauma-informed understanding, sitting for long periods of time when we have unhealed and stuck trauma in a nervous system, can sometimes create more challenge and more problems for folks if we don't have the skillful means or skillful guidance to really support working with that. So it might not be a place people really want to start. Especially if you know that's something that's happening, right? To sit with that internal stuck turmoil, it's not safe to actually do that. So my encouragement is with any client and with any group even that I support, that we start where it feels safe to do so, right? And only I can answer that, and only I can answer that today, because what if I'm in a big trigger? Today is not a good day to probably sit for 45 minutes. That's a bad idea. Right? But today might be a good day to hang out with the banana, right? Like to just practice in that way. I think it's listening to it ongoingly and evolving it ongoingly and following what works for you, right? What practices really are the ones that say something's shifted on the inside and it feels more wholesome to me now. That's a good practice for me. And I'll share that the whole point of practice, the whole point of sitting down to a formal practice, is so we can live it. It's not just to, and I think any well-known scholar, teacher, practitioner of these teachings would say it's so that we can live it in an embodied way. And I actually think in this day and age, it's harder to do, but it's probably even more important to do, actually, to live it in the informal way. So the more we can find, what does that look like? Like, if I'm cultivating and nourishing that seed of gratitude that came from the banana, the next time I'm at the store, I talk to the guy who stacked the banana and I have a conversation with him and I'm present with him and I bring my practice alive in that moment with him and create a relational mindfulness practice. And just to give a shout out for formal practice, it is a good thing when we can find what skillfully works and safely works for us. And I think what it facilitates is the ability to know how to skillfully meet the difficult over time, right? To your point that there wasn't enough in the urge surfing, right? It's like, how do I understand inside the different ways we're practicing what you're exploring, being in the body a little bit more? There are really good reasons to have a safe practice to sit in and with for an extended period of time, so you can feel your own capacity to actually meet the difficulties through whatever skillful practices you have formally that are very beneficial. They make their way into healing as well.
Thank you for sharing that. I had seen in your bio that on your website that you enjoy a lot of different things, and one of them that caught my eye was resting with the trees. So, if we want to engage with nature, do you have any, do you have like some simple suggestions on how we can rest with the trees, or, what are some things that we can do to rest with the trees or to just engage with nature in a way that might be helpful and healing?
Well, similar answer to the one I gave before, but I'm going to say follow what calls you in nature, because that's probably a place that would be a good place to practice in nature for oneself, informally or formally. For me, resting with trees has to do with that for my own nervous system, and what feels really good for me is usually if I can find places with the earth where I can get my body close to the earth and feeling like it's held by the earth. And trees are really good at this. If you get right down at their roots, right, and you can actually find a way to lay down on their roots, then you actually feel like they're kind of holding you up and around you. I also love canyons and crawling into rock crevices and practicing in that way. But that my nervous system really likes to have and to practice actually formally with feeling that sense of being held and in connection and in presence with those beings. And then that provides a bigger container for me to sit with and to be with and to practice whatever I might be cultivating in that particular practice in my own inner landscape. And my own belief is that all life on this earth is sentient, right? That these trees have an intelligence. We are learning so much more about this. They carry a heartbeat, they communicate, they're just like us. Why we have thought we aren't like all of them and them all of like us is silly. So we even they've mapped looking at our neural pathways look like the roots of trees and the mycelium that grow in that. I mean, it's incredible looking at that perspective of connection. Being drawn to wherever you're connected and spending time out there is enough. I like to say nature does its job. We're studying, like you were mentioning earlier, all those things that we know that it's doing. You practice a little bit of whatever you like to practice, walking outside mindfully, being in your senses, touching a tree, looking at a tree, whatever it is, laying with a tree. You're getting a twofer. Nature's just doing its job to help you remember you're going to be okay. Here's all this good change we'll give to your biochemistry and nervous system. And then you're developing your inner landscape. You're actually getting both. You're getting the outer and the inner benefit of spending time in this way to support your healing process. So it can be anything. Some people are drawn to water. Some people are drawn to the ant, the bug life, the insect life, the bird life, want to go be in relational fields. I have a friend who practices with the birds. He follows the birds and sits with the flocks of birds. It's a beautiful practice. So really, I think wherever your heart feels called to go sit and be with and practice and connect to nature, go there.
Would you mind sharing a little bit about your book and then also about upcoming retreats?
So I wrote a book on some of what I've been speaking about today. It's called, can I show it to you?
Yeah, I would love for you to show people.
Right. So there's my well-loved copy of
It's such a beautiful cover.
Thanks. Healing with Nature, Mindfulness and Somatic Practices to Heal from Trauma. But the short Reader's Digest sense of what's in that book is there are practices to develop your formal and informal mindfulness practice with nature, to develop your somatic practices with nature, and intentionally learning how to move towards trauma on your own with nature as our facilitator guide. And then the outcroppings that come from time with those practices. How do we experience more of those wholesome qualities? And once we're experiencing those wholesome qualities, how do we want to share them in life? So there is a section of the book where I speak about If we feel that healing reciprocity that nature has given us, how do we give it back? How do we give it back to the earth? And earth includes all humanity because all humanity is part of the earth. So it can be in any direction, but that because we're developing that greater sense of our healing with, how do we give that healing with back in some way? So that's the latter part of the book. And I offer retreats on this. So we go and spend days, sometimes just a short period of days and sometimes a long period of days, to explore these teachings and be in community. So another huge piece that I have found in this work is the importance of restoring our collective healing. So much of the suffering that most of us carry is so individual, but when we come together and nature just reminds us of this, we are together. So come together in the collective and be supported in that suffering that you're holding. And it's held in something, again, greater, right? And it has capacity for transformation. So that's really what those retreats are about. And I do have a few coming up. I have one in May, early May, in the Central California area. And I have one in June in the Boulder, Colorado area. And then I have one in September in the San Diego, California area. So those are touchstones for what's going on. There's other courses and things that I lead online, but the in-person retreats, those are the ones on the horizon for 2025.
That is very exciting. Those sound like wonderfully healing, magical opportunities. If people want to find out about these events or just follow you, is your website the best place?
Yeah. So the website's drrochellecalvert.com. And also that's true for all the social media handles that could exist. So same thing, you can find. I've got content that comes out on there pretty regularly, and also a YouTube channel if people are interested in the recordings. But also if you go to the website and or the YouTube channel, there's all kinds of recordings that I've offered freely that people can download and listen to for practice support and teaching support around this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. It has been a delight to chat with you, and I love all the ideas you're sharing and all the action steps that you're taking to actually bring this into practice, like people actually doing this in reality, not just conceptually, but actually doing it. So thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. Thank you for gathering beings that are up to doing this beautiful work of healing and coming into a greater sense of themselves. We need more of that.